When they were younger, they had a very close relationship, but now they are as distant as possible. Kids push themselves away from each other. Why do they do it?
Feeling compared, feeling like it's not fair. How do you respond to this as a parent in a way that doesn't actually make the relationship worse?
Was there something I did that drove a wedge between my kids?
There's a couple things I've heard from kids that make it hard. So one, I will tell you, is...
So today we're talking sibling rivalry. I mean, it never ends. When you look at adult relationships and siblings, I think the big question parents have often is like, how do I make them be close and want to hang out with each other? Like, what do you need to do right in those early years?
I know it's not always easy. And, you have two kids and I have two kids, right? So we sort of watch this sibling thing unfold.
Yeah.
And, we get a lot of letters about it. And it's like such an important topic because you want your kids to be friends. And sometimes they're worst enemies.
Yes. Yeah. So I want to read you this letter and we'll kick it off at what this parent is asking. Dear Dr. Lisa and Reena, I have one teen son and a tween, very soon to be teen daughter. When they were younger, they had a very close relationship, but now it seems they are as distant as possible and want nothing to do with one another on the best days. How can I help support them to begin to value their relationship and try to build it to at least some degree? Thank you. I think this is like such a common letter, a basic theme that so many families struggle with. How do you think kids push themselves away from each other? Why do they do it?
Why do they do it? There's a lot of different reasons why this could be happening. One is that kids want to differentiate. And we see some research on this that like if one kid's good at something, another kid wants to be good at something else so that they're not in direct competition with each other. So that can actually in some ways ease the tension between kids because they're not actually like competing on the same playing field, so to speak. So they push away in that way. So if one kid's really into soccer, another kid may be like, I'm definitely not playing soccer, right? And it can be neutral or hostile, their decision not to do it. But another reason, and Reena, I'm wondering if you're starting to see this with your age gap in your kids. Sometimes when the older kid gets into adolescence or high school, their younger sibling who they used to enjoy, teenagers can become allergic to anything that feels like what they would say is babyish.
True.
So sometimes if the younger sibling is still into stuff or it even reminds them of being younger, I think teenagers can suddenly be very, very brusque with sibs who are a little younger because they're just like, teenagers are working hard to be cool sometimes. Have you seen this at home or in other peer relationships?
Yeah. And in some families, I feel like it doesn't happen just in the teenage years. Like it happens very early on. Like, why are you taking my truck? I don't want you to take the truck. And then I feel as a parent, was there something I did in those early formative years that drove a wedge between my kids? Like, are there things that parents should think about in those? And then not even in those early years, even in the teenage years, like, if you have one child that has more needs than the other and you're attentive, whatever that issue might be, does that then form that the other kid? I just feel like there's so many outcomes for them to be driven away from each other more than to each other.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple things I've heard from kids that make it hard at home. So one, I will tell you, is comparison. That when parents are comparing kids to one another, it is really hard on kids. And Reena, the way I've come to know this is that sometimes when I'm speaking at a school and I'm working with kids, I will ask them like to get a piece of paper and share with me something they want their folks to know. Because often I'll meet with the kids during the day and then the parents in the evening. And so it's an anonymous way for kids to be like, please tell them this. And I have heard on more occasions than I expected kids saying, please tell them to stop comparing me to my older brother or older sister.
Really?
So I think, in terms of like the things that we do that may have some influence here, I think comparison avoided at all costs. There can also be ways where we can have unrealistic expectations, right? I think, the nature of having a sibling, you grew up with siblings, right? I actually grew up as an only child. So this area for me is always sort of interesting because I don't have any personal experience to draw on. But, I think the nature of having a sibling is like best friend, worst friend. They're great to have from what I understand, in terms of watching kids and watching my own kids. And then also like the most annoying person in the world, and they still live with you even when you don't want them to be living with you.
Hey there, we are really trying to get the Ask Lisa podcast out to as many families as possible. And one of the ways you can help us right now, if you can just hit the like button on what you're watching, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then post a comment in the comment section. Every bit of interaction actually helps us reach more families who also might need this support. Okay, now back to our episode.
What's your take on all this?
No, I'm thinking actually from back to school, I was getting very teary-eyed and emotional, and they both looked at each other and gave each other this oh God, here she goes again. And I love that moment that they've got this silent language and kind of connection, but I know that they drive each other nuts. And even when I'm not trying to compare, I'm just giving someone praise for doing something really good. The other one will pipe up and be like, well, what about me? Didn't I do that too?
It's true, right? And I think, they even if you're not doing it, they feel it. I think the other big thing that comes up as far as the parents' involvement is concerned is kids' ideas of fairness. Like who's getting what and is everything fair? And, of course, in a lot of families, fair doesn't mean equal, right? Different kids need different things at other times, different times. And you also mentioned sometimes a kid needs something a lot. And this is something that's come up in the work I've done where there may be a family where a kid has a lot of needs, right? That there's something going on, or they're really struggling, or maybe they have a health concern. And so, of course, in the natural, sort of system of events, the family focuses on that kid, and that can leave the other kid feeling crummy and lousy, and kind of crummy and lousy in a couple ways. Like one, feeling neglected, but also the other feeling like I feel bad for being grumpy about the fact that my sibling is getting care when my kid is suffering, when they're suffering. So it's such an interesting question, Reena, because as we start to tease it apart, it just gets to all of these core elements in family life, feeling compared, feeling like it's not fair, feeling like somebody's in your space when you don't want them in your space, feeling like you want them, but only in certain ways, right? I mean, it's such an interesting, right to the heart of the strange dynamics of living with people. I think that's
so
sort
true.
of the heading, right?
Living with people
You just
very
have to live with people.
closely. Yes, absolutely. But, I look back and I just wonder, there are just in family life moments where I wonder, okay, am I driving a wedge between them? And one of those moments is when one picks on the other. Is there a better way to
Yeah.
deal with that? How do I deal with some of these daily situations where I'm not ruining their long-term relationship without realizing it?
Right. Okay. So this is one thing we know, that siblings get at each other constantly, right? And there's even been research studies showing that it's 60 times an hour or 48 times an hour. I mean, that just if they actually track siblings bugging each other or picking on each other, if they're in the same space, it's almost a near constant. And it is often, intermixed with enjoying each other or as I would say to my daughters, you guys are fun fighting. I would actually watch them sometimes fight to entertain themselves, right? And so it's sort of a constant in parenting. So the question is, how do you respond to this as a parent in a way that doesn't actually make the relationship worse, right? That's what you're asking. So I think sometimes the best thing is to be you all need to work that out, right? And actually make it their job to go deal with the solution to the problem, if it even needs a solution. But you can say, you guys, knock it off. You're not being nice to each other. Or knock it off. You're not being nice to your brother. Go work it out. And there's value, we know, in asking kids to sort this out and not having the adult intervene all the time. Because if the adult intervenes all the time, then there's no way you're going to win, and you're just going to bother everybody. I think there are times though, and we can easily picture this where one kid is way too mean to the other, or the power dynamic is way out of balance. A very common thing I hear all the time is the teenager was at school all day. They walk in the house, the younger sibling does something either totally fine or not that bad, and the teenager just lays into them, just gives it to them in a really harsh way. And then, the younger kid is often kind of gobsmacked and upset. I think those are times in parenting where you do actually need to say hey, that was not fair, or that's not like you, or hey, why don't you take a break, where you actually intervene a little more aggressively. But there's no magic. When is the line of saying, hey, you guys go work this out versus I'm going to step in on one kid's behalf? But I think a lot of parents probably can intuit it.
Yeah.
But I would say I don't think you should assume it is always your job to step in or never your job to step in.
And it sounds like you're saying step in when it gets really ugly. And then it's you don't worry about their long-term relationship at that point. You've got to correct the behavior.
I think that's exactly it. I think that's exactly it, right? Like, you can't let, like, completely over the line behavior stand, and I think there has to be some attempt at repair. I don't think there's real value in forcing a kid to apologize to another kid. Like, I think,
Really?
yeah, I think
Why? Why?
I
Because
think
I
of
always make them
yeah.
apologize.
So how do you do it? Like, how do you do it?
I just said, please apologize. Like, that's not acceptable. Like, you need to say sorry.
Okay.
And then it's never, ever a sincere sorry.
Well, that's my thought, right? That if it's extracted, it's not real. But I trust your parenting gut. So talk
Mm.
me through why you do it anyway. Why you make them say it anyway, even if you know it doesn't feel all that sincere.
Well, because it stops the conversation and it forces them to be like, this is not acceptable. And this is my way of telling you and flagging to you. Like, if I was a dog, I would literally have grabbed you by the ruff of your neck. Like,
Yes.
that is my equivalent of
Yeah.
forcing them to apologize, is grabbing them by the ruff of their neck if we were dogs. And so we're not. So I have them apologize to each other. But does it get in? Does it? I feel like it creates more animosity, mom siding with her or him.
Okay. Okay, so but, like, I love hearing you play that out, right? Like, it's a good, like, stopper, right? If you're like, "Hey, knock it off, apologize to him," or "Knock it off, apologize to her." Like, what you're doing, and this makes a ton of sense to me, is you're actually creating a, like, "Okay, you've crossed a line," right? Like, it
Yes.
was bickering, it was silly. Okay, now you're at the point where you actually owe an apology. What you're noting, and I think this is really important, is it effectively stops things, but it actually opens up a new gate of trouble
That's
of,
it.
like, now you're on her team, now you're on his team. Okay. So how do we solve this, Reena? How do we solve this? Thinking it through, what else might work? What ideas do you have in it while you think I'm gonna think?
I'm just at a loss because I don't think I do this very well in parenting. I just think and let's add to this the real honesty, which is like I am juggling 1,000 things in the house as this is going over. I have no patience at this point, but I want to send the signal, and this is the signal. This is the grab them by the ruff of their neck, and show that this is not appropriate behavior. But I don't have that dog language in real life to be able to convey that. I don't know what that
You can't
is.
grab them by the ruff of their
To me,
necks.
it's always been like
Yeah.
an apology.
So what if instead of an extracted apology, because like it serves the purpose of stopping things, but it doesn't actually feel like a real apology and it actually opens
Yes.
up this like team question. What if instead you were like, you know what? I'm going to make you stop. Like, you need to stop talking to each other this way. Like, or it's time for you to stop. And so there's not like a forced apology, but you are saying to the kid who's over the line, you need to knock it off. Like, stop right there. Do you think that they would stop if you said that?
Yes, but I like just telling them to knock it off.
Yeah, just knock it off.
Yeah.
But then I wonder, and as if we have all the time in the world, I wonder if you go back to the kid who you had to say that to and say, here's what, do you know why I asked you to knock it off? Or do you
Later.
understand why yeah, later. Do you understand why,
That's the
do you
hidden
understand
key.
what the issue was?
So smart.
And see if when they're not in the moment of having, whatever
Mm,
irritation they have with a sibling, see if they can actually say like, yeah, no, XYZ. Because I think a lot of kids can do that if you get
yeah.
them out of the moment.
Yeah.
And then I think, and this is my fantasy version, right? This is my like, imagining like best possible scenario version.
Yeah.
Then I wonder if you say to your kid, like, what are you going to do to fix it? Like, or how are you
Hmm.
going to fix it? They may say, I'm not going to do it again. I would probably accept that. They may say, I'll go tell her I'm sorry. I wouldn't, hold your breath for that. But I think as we talk it through, what I am really liking is uncoupling interfering in a way that makes it stop and keeps it from escalating
Hmm.
from repair questions.
Got it.
And maybe that's the principle we're getting at, is that when kids are being icky with each other, there's two jobs. One, not just letting it spin on and on and on and escalate as it sometimes will. And
Hmm.
the other is, if repair is necessary, asking them to figure out what's involved and all that. And maybe it could even turn out to be something genuine. Okay, what do you
Yeah.
think of this
I
this view
love
of it?
this. You know why? Because you've taught me two things here, which is like a simple knock it off is enough instead of just forcing them to apologize. But then when you are not as stressed, taking it up again with them separately and having them figure out what the punishment is instead of you being forced to come up with it and then them thinking it's totally an unjust punishment. And maybe that processes and hits differently.
It might. And I think the only tweak I would make is I would say, like, repair, right? Like, what's the repair? And we've talked about this in other
Mm.
episodes, and I love it. Like,
Instead
discipline
of
should
punishment?
I think we
Yeah.
could call it punishment, but, like, I think anytime we're punishing a kid, what we're really hoping is that the punishment, if we're gonna call it that, like, is how are you gonna fix this? Like, what are you gonna
Mm,
do to make this right?
I like
That's
that.
really the essential issue. There's something else, Rena, as we're talking it through,
Mhm.
there's a value, such a value, I think, in trying to take the long view of kids' development and kids' relationships. But often right at the moment when your kids are having a harder time with each other, especially, as they're maybe moving into early adolescence, they're also having a harder time with us usually. They are more
Mhm.
resistant to us. They are wanting to distance themselves from us. And I think there are plenty of adults who can say, "Oh my gosh, when I was a teenager, my sibling drove me crazy," or "We were at each other's throats all the time, but now we're really close."
Yeah.
Is it helpful if the parent who's watching this all can sort of step back and think, "All right, are they in a phase, each of them? Is this happening because one kid's trying to articulate their autonomy or one kid doesn't wanna do
Mhm.
anything babyish? Is there a way that I can kinda keep it gentle enough so that they don't really harm each other emotionally or otherwise?
Yeah. Yeah.
But can I let time do its work?"
Is there a way that you can make your kids be friends or at least lay the groundwork for that?
I think you can't make kids do anything, to be honest, I think, and you sure as heck can't make teenagers do anything. But lay the groundwork. I think there's a couple things that make a big difference. One is one-on-one time, like
Mhm.
giving kids each actually their own
Mm.
time, I think is really
Mm.
important. I think if they always feel like they're having to compete with one another
Yeah.
for your focus, I think that that sets up a bad dynamic, or I think it just doesn't point things in the right direction. So one thing I think adults can do is definitely be like, "I have time with you, I have time with you, you guys don't have to be head to head." I think that's important. There is value in having things that your whole family enjoys. Setting aside time to do things that everybody is into or people take turns leading. I think also about people being really creative, and
Mhm.
finding ways to say, like, "Today, we're gonna go with your brother's plan, tomorrow, we'll go with your sister's plan."
Mhm.
Finding ways to actually have kids feel like they're equals in the house.
Mhm.
What am I missing? You grew up with siblings,
No.
you got 2 kids. What do you think?
No, I think you're spot on in your suggestions about all this. But I think we all, as parents, hope that we can somehow engineer or do 2 or 3 different things in the
Mm,
relationship that will then make them lifelong bosom
mm.
buddies. There are so many other dynamics at play, I think, whether you have 2 of the same gender, 1 of each, 4 of each, um, that I think we as parents wanna figure out, like, what's that magic thing that could make a difference? And I guess there isn't one magic thing.
I don't think there is a magic thing, and I think especially like you said it with the dynamics, like, my daughters are 7 years apart, right? That's a
Mhm.
very particular dynamic, like, they were never head to head for anything because they were their needs were so different. And so, frankly, I think in many ways I've enjoyed relatively low conflict because,
Mhm. Mhm.
they just are
Mhm.
so far apart. Whereas I know, in families with kids like yours, like, 2 years apart,
Yeah.
3 years apart, like,
Oh my
there's a lot
gosh.
more heat.
Heat, they eat each other alive, right? But I also feel like when you've got boys, a boy energy is very different from girl energy, it just really is. But what's your advice, Lisa, as we go for parents who really wanna get it right with their kids and sibling relationships?
I think my biggest advice is to always appeal to the better sort of part of a kid. I say this, I'm gonna say it again. It is such a valuable way to think about kids and especially adolescents when they can be pretty spicy. All kids have 2 sides,
Yeah.
right? They have their, short-tempered, icky, provocative, annoying, self-centered side, like, I'll
Mhm,
just say
mhm.
it. And then they have their broad-minded, thoughtful, empathic, caring, really wonderful side. I think that, especially in the heat of a moment when kids are showing us their worst side, right? When kids are going at each other, they're showing us their worst side. I think to say, like, "You both, like, are so much better than this. Like, go
Mm,
pull
mm.
yourselves together," right?
Yeah, yeah.
And appealing or, like, you just talk to your brother in a way that, like, is not okay,
Mhm.
right? Like, "I'm gonna stop you right there, and you're gonna figure out how to fix this," right? Like,
Mm,
always appealing to that better side, but steering clear of and our conversation helps me get clarity on this, steering clear of, because I want you to be friends, and you 2 have to be friends, or you
yes.
3 have to be friends," right? Like, as soon as an adult lays it down as an expectation, like, forget it, right? Just take the broad view. Like, these are people who will be in each other's lives for a long time. The more you are appealing to the better side of themselves and how they treat each other or treat one another, I think that sort of holds a high expectation for behavior, and kids tend to rise to high
Mhm.
expectations.
A lot to think about here, Lisa. So what do you have for us for parenting to go?
Serena, sometimes I have noticed, and I wonder if you've noticed, that a change of setting can make a huge difference. Have you ever noticed that, like, everybody acts differently when you're on vacation as a family, like when you're not at home in the
So true.
same patterns and routines?
Absolutely.
So I do wonder, as I talk about, like, having times when, we do things as a family, I do wonder for parenting to go if that do stuff as a family is like, let's all go for a hike, or let's all go to the movies, or
Mhm.
let's all, like, take turns picking a restaurant and somebody, gets to pick. I think sometimes we're able to reboot and reframe and find a different part of ourselves when you literally put yourself in a different place. And so I would say maybe especially if siblings are having a hard time with each other or with one another, I would say like, "Hey, let's all go, down to the lake and let's just spend an afternoon at the lake, or let's all go to this game and just spend an afternoon at the game." And just try to create a new pattern, a new setting, and see if that doesn't bring out more of the behavior you're hoping for.
Never thought about it, but you're so right. The summers sometimes take the pressure off in a way it's harder with day-to-day life. So that's a great little example of how it can make a difference. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. I'll see you next week.
I'll see you next week.